According to a Pew Research poll put out in 2009, U.S. citizens are still divided as to whether they believe in evolution or not. 61% say that it does happen, that humans and other living things have evolved over time, and 32 of those 61% say that that happened just by natural processes, whereas another 22% say that evolution was guided by a supreme being, maybe a god of some sort. But then there are still 31% that believe that humans and other living things have existed in their present form since the beginning of time. We are unusual compared to other Western companies. For example, you can see up here Iceland and Denmark and Sweden and France. The vast majority believe that evolution is true, and there's just a small minority that seem to doubt it, whereas we're all the way down here, where you've got the unsures in the middle, you've got this many people not believing and this many people believing. But these statistics are just looking at the citizenry. Amongst scientists, there's much less of an argument. 97% of scientists in the U.S. believe that humans and other things have evolved over time. A small percentage say that evolution might have been guided by a supreme being. Many just say it happens by natural processes, but 97% of scientists agree that evolution occurs, leaving only 2% that believe otherwise. So why is it that almost all scientists agree on this while the citizenry is in disagreement? Science has very little to do with what people believe. It more has to do with arguments that are either supported or refuted by evidence. And over again, the theory of evolution has been supported by powerful evidence gathered from thousands upon thousands of experiments. And in this talk, I'm going to share with you some of those categories of evidence, including transitional form fossils, biogeography, particularly around islands, homologous structures, vestigial traits, embryology, genetic similarities, and artificial selection. Let's start with transitional form fossils first. Fossils are the remains of organisms that have fallen into the perfect conditions, let's say a lake, and then got covered in sediments washed by a river, eventually becoming compacted by the pressure of added sediments until it becomes petrified or turned to rock. The fossil record gives us this series of snapshots into evolutionary history, the oldest fossils coming from the oldest strata or levels, like say this one, which is pretty old, and then the newer ones forming on top. And so if we look at fossils that are in a lower one, and then the next one up, and then the next one up, we can recreate in slow motion an idea of how evolution might have taken place. And sometimes in the hunt we find very key fossils, like say this fossil right here, which is a very famous one called Archaeopteryx. Archaeopteryx is a reptile. You can see how much its head resembles this older fossil of a T-Rex, and yet it seems along its limbs right here to have some feathers that have been preserved, which is a suggestion for a daring claim that some scientists came up with, that modern-day birds are actually descended from dinosaurs. And it was a really daring claim, and it didn't seem to make a lot of sense until we found a key transitional form, this Archaeopteryx fossil, which lended a lot of support to that idea. So next time you look at a bird, look again a little bit closer. You're looking at the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great- inform our own evolution. For example, this hominid fossil is very well known. It's called Lucy. And though Lucy was not quite a modern human, she does seem to be one transitional form in the evolution of humans from our common ancestors with chimps. But we don't need to look at dead organisms in order to find evidence for evolution. Biogeography, that is, the physical location of organisms on the Earth, can also give away a lot of the evolutionary story. Darwin and Wallace both thought up the idea of biogeography as evidence for evolution. I'm going to work with one of Darwin's famous examples, namely the Galapagos Islands, which you can see right here. They're floating out in the ocean just off the coast of South America. And he had previously, on his voyage of the Beagle, made some stops and surveyed some of the wildlife here on South America, and then went over to the Galapagos, and he started to see some patterns between these two that made him think a lot of evolution. On the left, you can see a green iguana, which specializes in climbing trees and lives in South America. And then on the right, you can see a marine Galapagos iguana, which doesn't climb trees so well, but can climb up rocks pretty darn well. It also happens to be a very strong swimmer. He found in South America this cormorant species. Cormorants are a fishing bird, so they dive into the water, they fish, and then when they're done fishing, they hang their wings out to dry. Like you can see this one, he's kind of spreading out his wings to dry in the sun. And then when he got to the Galapagos, oh my god, he found another cormorant species. Little bit different physically. It looks like it has stubbier wings. It can't really fly, but still a good swimmer. And look, it's doing the exact same behavior. This one's spreading out its wings in the sun to dry them off. On the South American mainland, he found this prickly pear cactus. And then on the Galapagos Islands, he found another prickly pear. This is a cactus tree. It seems to have changed a little bit in that it grows much higher off the ground. But if you look at the shapes of those leaves, they're pretty unmistakable, almost exactly the same as these prickly pear from South America. Was this some sort of crazy coincidence that he was finding similar species in both of these areas? Probably not. In no way does this or any other evidence prove evolution. You can't ever prove anything 100% in science. However, it does seem like the simplest explanation would be an evolutionary one. It wouldn't be that hard to imagine how your occasional cormorant or iguana or something like that was living over here in South America might have gotten washed out to sea, maybe on a log or something, and managed to survive the journey out to the Galapagos, where it encountered a new environment and started to evolve. Evolved to become a little bit different from the old ancestral species over here, but still recognizable. That's a much simpler story to tell than the idea that perhaps cormorants evolved separately, both in the Galapagos and in South America, or that somehow very similar birds got placed here and here. Ever since, many scientists have been interested in the Galapagos as an example of evolution in action, and many have studied Darwin's favorite example of natural selection, the finches, looking at what the common ancestor from the South American mainland might have looked like, and then by the time a couple of those birds arrived over on the island, looking at how natural selection shaped some of them to become warblers, some of them to become insect eaters, some of them to become bud eaters, cactus flower eaters, and seed eaters, and so on. Natural selection shaping one species into many different species once they reached a new environment. Our next source of evidence occurs in organisms' bodies themselves, and they're called homologous structures. At this point, you guys know this word root very well. Homo means same, and we learned about homologous chromosomes, chromosomes that code for the same traits. In this case, homologous structures means physical structures inside the body that have the same shape. It's really evident inside these limbs right here. For example, human hands and cat legs and whale flippers and bat wings all have 5 sets of phalanges on the end. You can see them. Oh, it looks like the whales only have 4. But the bats also have 5. And then they have carpals and metacarpals all in this region of the hand. And then they all have a radius and an ulna. And they all have a humerus bone. They're not all the same shape. These limbs don't all do the same thing. You know, for whales, it's been shaped to become more streamlined going through the water, and for bats, better at flapping with lots of skin between the bones, and for cats, good for landing. For us, good for picking up objects and manipulating them. Yet, the basic structure is the same, and so they're considered homologous. Again, what's the simplest explanation for this? Well, if you went back far enough to the time where humans, cats, whales, and bats all shared a common ancestor, probably that common ancestor had the same arrangement of bones that all of these organisms do. And so each lineage would have inherited the genes for constructing this particular bone pattern. And that further suggests that organisms are related to each other, and if they're related, that implies that they evolved. As a second example, let's look elsewhere in the animal kingdom, namely in the class Insecta. So you can see amongst these, got a wasp species right here, you've got an ant species right here, and a dragonfly species right here. Though they are very different, they hunt very differently, they have different sources of food. Some of them live in colonies, some of them live alone, they have different mating practices, and so on. You can see some basic homologous structures in their bodies. For example, all of them have 3 parts to their body, like a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. Look, here's another head, thorax, abdomen, head, thorax, abdomen. Even our friend, that disguised mantis that had those leaf-like outer wing casings, also has 3 sections. You can see here's the head right at the top, thorax right here in the middle, and then abdomen back towards the end. Even though these organisms look on the surface very different, when you see these patterns, it suggests that they all evolved from a common ancestor that also had 3 body parts.